Very top side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sign and pass.
Oh, we're good, it's just minutes. Jenny, you okay?
Chairman, if you want to start at 5:05 and give Mr. Blackson until then.
All right, about half a minute. Good afternoon to everyone here. We appreciate you coming, and at this time, we're going to call our meeting for the Edgefield County Land Management Ordinance Steering Committee meeting. We're going to call it to order at this time. And come on in, Charles. Charles, come up. Good to see you. Okay, we have our quorum now that we need. Father God, we thank you for the opportunity for us to meet here once again. We pray that you help us to make decisions that are pleasing in their sight and that it's good for the people of this county, and not just personally, but for the whole individual, for everyone that we represent. We thank you for all you've done. We ask you to protect us and guide us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Approval of the agenda. Approval of January 28th, 2020 meeting agenda. Could I get a motion to approve our agenda before you?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Motion is second. All in favor of approval of the agenda for tonight, raise your right hand. Opposers, ayes have it. Now we have 3 minutes before us. We need to approve an individual. We need approval for the minutes of May 7th, 2020. Can I get a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, we have the May 26th committee meeting. I need a motion for approval of that. Can I get a
Motion.
Motion second, all in favor, right hand. Approval of the June the 23rd, 2023 committee meeting. Motion?
Motion.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor, right hand. Opposed, ayes have it. Okay. We appreciate that. Now we're gonna go into our new business tonight. We have Mr. Ford with us, Mr. Paradise over, so forth. We're gonna go into new business. We got 3 items. We got a review of our LMO draft. And then we got the review of the zoning map draft, and then we're gonna, after that, we're gonna vote tonight to send it to the planning commission. If we have, we have questions also. At this time, we're gonna entertain Mr. Ford for committee question, discussion, and review the entire title of the draft that we have before us. Everybody that have a copy of them here and have reviewed. Mr. Ford.
Is this the June 16th version, Kevin?
You should have before you a document that has a table of contents and 12 chapters. These have been drafted over the period of the last several months, and the intent is that these are still drafts. They're going to be drafts even after they leave this body and go on to the Plan Commission. The primary issues are that we had to take a significant part of the existing chapters 8 and other chapters out of the existing ordinance, and they have been reproduced and reordered within the new document. You'll note that chapter 12 is the element that shows the definitions. It's still a work in progress, as are all other chapters, as definitions that may be found within the document need to be inserted into that part of the draft. You'll note that as well that there's been a significant amount of additional work recently on chapter 3, which is the special resources. And I think that one has had probably the most drastic change from the first draft, which was about 3 months ago, to the newest draft that you have. Doc is making sure that all of you have copies of the current document. This is the same document that was sent out, I believe, early last week. And as I said before, this is a continuing to evolve draft. One thing we were asked is that we've had a lot of presentations over the course of the last several months as we were trying to put these drafts together. Tonight is really definitely an opportunity for you to tell us things that you may want to make sure are included in the document as part of the speaking for the record as to what goes to the Planning Commission. So on that basis, I'm not doing a formal presentation I'm here to listen and see what changes or edits or directions you may want to take the plan.
Okay, we'll probably start on my right, and start with you. If you have any questions, comments, and discussion. Okay.
Well, I can't go without having at least a comment or two, Yes, after sitting down and trying to look at this thing in total again, I think the one thing, in my opinion, that is the most important, one of the most important, if not the most important, and that is, to the citizens of Edgefield County, it will be found in Chapter 2. And that is, you know, what are the primary zoning districts and where am I zoned and how are they going to try to control me? That's the question I hear all the time. What can I build on my property? What can I do and what can I not do? And John, I'm sure you've heard that a million times. So, you know, when I first sat down, if I was just a new person reading this and I come to section 251, which is where we start with the definitions and what are these primary zoning districts, we talk about a lot of things, and starting with RA, which is the rural agricultural. That is our most, what I guess, they can have the most freedom, if you want to say that. They're less restrictive than any of the other designations that we come up with, which is a good way. One of the things that I did notice is that, you know, the one thing that a lot of people have asked me about is how much can I build on my land? I got 17 acres. Can I build 2 houses? Can I build 1 house? You know, what can I really do on it? Now, I know that we're going to get down to that here in just a minute, but I really think that's one of the key things that people were going to say when we have public comments is just that. What can I build on my property? You know, so I think that table that we have, that first table that's in Chapter 2, which talks about all the zoning, what's that table? Oh, I guess it has a number. Yeah, table 2-1. You know, that's the one that kind of breaks out, gives all the zoning districts and their principal uses in it, you know, which is really good, you know, and it's a lot of information there that you can't absorb it. Most of the people won't be able to absorb it just immediately, you know. So I really think that one of the things that we could do back in under the definitions, under, say, 25111, is whenever we're talking about things like density. We call it the less density or the more dense or somewhat dense. We have to add some context to that. When you talk about density, you only mean 1 house can be built on this 100-acre parcel of ground? Or is it, I don't know. Somewhere in there, that's what in my opinion, the people are going to want to know. And other places we say it is a very low density area, sustained rural areas. And I mean, those are all kind of unique terms, but they don't define any specifics on it. You know, there's a gradation we're showing in this thing here. And I think and I'm not exactly sure how to do it, how to get it across to everybody what the gradation is. And Kevin, I know you were about to say something in regards to lot size and things like that. If you could mention that, maybe that kind of ties in with some of this.
So a question for you would be, do you think perhaps in terms of section 251, 2511, just referencing their density in terms of how they relate to each other? So just stating that this is the least dense district, this is the most dense district, this is in that regard, because what I will say is later in the LMO, you have the specific lot sizes.
Yeah, I think that would help, and I think as I started out here when I said that the rural agricultural is probably what percentage? 75% of the county thus far? I don't know if that's, or is it 65%? I don't know. You know, if you're in that type of a situation, then you grade it down, because when you get to rural conservation versus rural estate versus residential large lots, you know, I mean, we're going down.
Can I ask and make sure I'm understanding you correctly? To actually define what percentage of the county is zoned that in the zoning map?
Well, I mean, that's just a generality. I think the
Okay.
specifics are going to be, if I own X plot of parcel of ground, I'm going to be interested in what's going on there, you know. So I think as a general thing, you know, right now, you know, the rural agricultural is a huge part of the county. And But over time, I'd say in 10 or 15 years from now, that's gonna shrink down some.
There-
I mean, that's just growth, that's,
You had a question at the beginning that I forgot to answer. As far as how many homes can be built on a piece of property, there's three things that regulate that. One, you can build any number of homes on a piece of property. In theory, you could build 50 if you had, if you could meet setback requirements and driveway access, so long as it's real property. Now, the two things that start to change that is if you want different individuals to own property, that gets into subdivisions. And then the other aspect is you can have two address points on a driveway. So you couldn't have like a driveway with like 4 houses off of it.
you know, I mean, that's just like secondhand, that's what you and Doc do all the time. Yeah, Doc, well,
Yeah, my comment would be that, also, if you put the percentage of the county that's zoned a specific thing on the zoning chart, that's gonna change every time the zoning map changes. And we don't actually have a zoning map yet. I imagine that the one that we put together is probably gonna change drastically between this body and the planning commission and then county council. So, you know, we can put a placeholder in place if that's what you're looking for. But really, we don't know what the percentages are gonna be, and even when we do, then that'll be a section that has to change every time we change a zoning map.
no, that's not what I'm looking for. What I'm really looking for is what Kevin just stated. And I think up front there somewhere, is something along those lines that applies to every one of these as you go down, you know. Just basically a summary of what Kevin just mentioned, because I think a lot of people don't know that, you know. If you're reading this thing for the very first time, we want them to make it just as easily understood, you know. It all depends, like you said, if you're gonna subdivide it, you're gonna have separate landowners or other things like that, or if you want to build a house for you and your son and one for your daughter.
I will say this, and this is my only concern, that starts to become a lot of information very quickly, front-loaded in the document, that gets into specifics later. Also, I mean, for example, several of the things you just referenced are located within several different chapters of the LMO.
Well, maybe you just kind of put a very general statement up the front, and you reference
Perhaps
them
a
to
forward.
those other sections. for
Perhaps a
more- for
forward that
greater,
kind of, okay.
you know.
Mr. Oliver, essentially what you're asking for is more of a prologue that tells about this is what's supposed to be in each one of these.
Yes.
Which can either be part of the document or part of the adoption effort. As part of the resolution to adopt can include some of the information that you're asking for. That doesn't necessarily have to be in the ordinance itself, because the ordinance itself, the densities, the percentages are all going to change.
Right, yeah, percentages, yeah, they will constantly change, and it'd be a nightmare to even try to keep up with. No, I think an explanation, maybe it's like, the user's manual, how to use this document, almost in a sense, is sort of what I was looking at a little bit. But, you know, that's the first thing that hit me when I started rereading this thing again, and I just, a lot of people can say, what's the difference between a low-density lot and a large lot? You know, I mean, they're not gonna know, and how can they go and jump to that spot that finds out what is a large lot and what is low density, you know? So, I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate here, because I know what we're gonna get when we get out to the public, you know?
One thing I might add, Commissioner Oliver, is we could do, as John mentioned, if you look at your very first page, which is the organization of the ordinance breakdown by article, perhaps some language at the beginning of that somewhat mirrors what you have in the first chapter of the ordinance, which is purpose, that would maybe somewhat break down. Or perhaps the LMO could have a separate document, like a one-pager, that's a breakdown of what ordinance are, what zoning is. For example, if someone's building a house in Edgefield County, if they come to our office, we have a packet that explains kind of the process to them.
It does, yeah.
Perhaps we could put together a paper that was similarly, if someone comes to our office asking, hey, I'm curious about these ordinances, you know, basically just a primer, you know, a one-pager, education and planning and development and zoning and ordinances.
I think that would be helpful, you
Yeah.
know, somewhere in that mode of trying to, because I know when you give somebody this document with, you know, 150 pages or whatever we're up to right now, they're gonna just go blurry-eyed, especially when they get to the chapter on signs. You know, we got 65 pages about signs, you know, good grief, I never made it through the whole thing, you know.
Well, I think, I'm just gonna go into the subject about signs. I think, you know, anybody that wants to know about a sign type philosophy, that's what this office is for, is to, you know, interpret it for them and say, hey, this is, you know, let's flip to the sign section instead of going through 3 or 4 different chapters. And so that's what they're a resource for.
To add to that, my hope is that the first page that we have, I actually like this. This was something that we took out of Duluth, I believe, which is you know, at the beginning that breaks down and kind of describes what each article is. And the hope is that if someone has questions, it's very easy for us to direct them and navigate them. I'll be honest, anyone who is planning on sitting down and reading this like it's a novel, I got bad news. We're not good writers, you know.
That's why I mentioned that.
Yeah.
I do believe that the chapter 2 is the one that people will concentrate, which is what we really would want them to also concentrate on. And, you know, that's why we have a great planning and development group. Yeah.
And
Well, two things. It's organized in a way that makes it very easy for developers and staff to go through it. It's pretty much listed in order from the start to finish of a project. So basically, the way we've organized it is, if you are starting a project on your property, you start at chapter 1 and you work through the chapters, and that's kind of how it's designed. Now, the average homeowner is not going to understand a lot of stuff that's in this ordinance, and we don't expect them to. That's what staff is for. You know, they can come to us, give us their parcel number, and we can, this is your zoning district, and we can print out, you know, the use table and say, these are the allowed uses in that zoning district. You know, we can go through lot sizes and all that. We can kind of break it down for them, you know, on our side in a much more understandable way. Now, if you're a professional developer and you're looking, you know, at a huge tract of land or something like that, then obviously you want to do your homework before you get to the building and planning office. You want to do that preparation, you know, ahead of time. But developers are more schooled in the process, and they would have no trouble going through that document. Now, the signs portion, yes, that's a lengthy chapter, but I just want to say that the reason that chapter got so long is you can no longer regulate signs based on their content. So you can't say that you can't have a sign that says this, you know, that's the Supreme Court says that's unlawful. So now you have to regulate the signs by type, and you have to come up with all sorts of other ways to regulate the signs, because if you have to read the sign to regulate it, then you've already violated the law. So that by default made that chapter a little bit more lengthy than we probably would have liked.
I like Kevin's idea and stuff there. I think those things, that would, I think, answer a lot of the questions from my perspective, because maybe if you even put in there, reference them to which sections or which other chapters would provide more detail or something. I think always like that, so that you can find it quickly.
One of the last things that will happen with the ordinance is putting in the law cross-references.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's one of the last things that
Yeah,
happens.
absolutely.
Because they keep moving around. But yes, that's very definitely true.
And to reiterate what Doc just said, you know, the individual homeowner or landowner comes in, unfortunately, they're not gonna be happy no matter what when they read the ordinance. and you correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Fab, but when this county didn't have zoning, there was somebody in the Meriwether area, when it was you all was trying to start zoning, and he raised his ugly head, and he didn't want zoning this and that, and this and that. But then all of a sudden, 10 years later, when someone tried to do a development right next to him, all of a sudden he used zoning for his advantage. So, yeah, right, exactly. And so, like I said, again, this is here again, you're gonna have a homeowner, I can't do this with my lot, and I can't, put 5, 6 houses, I wanna give my kid this and that, this and that. Unfortunately, we don't live in a unlawful society right now. Never have, never will, I don't think we never will. And so that's what this right here is, and here again, it's because if I'm gonna build a $200,000, $300,000 house right here, I don't want someone come next door to, build something that's gonna look ugly, or put a cell tower next to me or whatever. And so, if I'm an out-of-towner coming in, looking for somewhere, a decent place to stay, and especially someone in school of that nature, they're gonna come in, wanna look at this and says, hey, what can come next to me and what can't? And then make the decision from there.
I think that was the issue we had a couple of weeks ago about the development near the industrial park area, That was my major question and thing there that I think would help clarify things as we go forward with meeting with the public down the road here a little bit.
Basically, I think we're on the right direction, We got to have some type of direction to go, or to go forward, which I think we are on that way. And I know there's a lot that I might be a little peculiar from other folks, and I got my ideas and all, and I don't like to be pushed in a corner too much, but still, everybody got to give some. We got to, have kind of flexible. And I think the direction we're going now, we got enough flexibility in it to kind of halfway, because everybody can have what they want, and so forth. But if you got to lead where everybody can have a piece of the pie, and this is like the direction we're going here now. Because, like I said, I was definitely anti-zoning. It still is, but we got to have it. We've got to have it to go on. We got to look at the future. You see the condition we in there. If we don't iron it down now, or start something for the future, we're gonna be in trouble. So I think we are doing a good job on this year. Let's just have it direction. We got it where people will understand it, and we did get the point over to them that this is what it is, and you got to adjust to it.
I would totally agree with that, because I think some of the growth that we have in the Meriwether community here is somewhat controversial, depending on whose side you're talking about there, that we don't have really anything to go on. I mean, there is nothing there to fall back on. And like you said, if we want to have controlled growth, as best Kevin's preached to us all the time about that, and sprawl and all these other things coming in, and everybody wants more restaurants, they want more, you name it, fast food areas and stuff. So all those things bring with it a lot more people, a lot more car wrecks, accidents. I've had so many on Currytown Road this past 3 weeks that it's just mind-boggling, So, but that's why we try to control some of this. Doc Scott.
Yes, and when we get to the public hearing portion of this, that's an important thing to remind people of. Without zoning, the government has zero control over development. That's an important thing to remember. The zoning is what allows us to determine what can go where. If you don't have any zoning, and there's going to be people that are very anti-zoning, but if you have no zoning, then you want to have your shop, but that also means that another person can come in and put a 300 lot subdivision right next to your house, or an industrial facility next to your house, or cell tower, or waste treatment plant, or whatever they want to put there. Zoning is what gives the government the tools to say, no, that won't go there. And it's important to remind people of that.
Right, correct. Agree with you on that.
And then the other thing is too, it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's hard and also almost impossible to go back and try to zone something that hadn't been zoned before.
Once something is built, and if you zone then, they're grandfathered in. So as long as they're in operation, they can theoretically operate forever. The zoning is not retroactive.
I would agree with everything you said, Doc, which I do most of the time, except I would say, instead of giving it government control are the people that give it to the people that are working these various governmental departments at. So it's really the people that have control over their own destiny in a sense there.
Well, the people control the government, so,
There you go.
yeah, we're their representative, but it gives us the tools necessary to say, you can't build that there. It's the people that determine by vote and their representatives, who sets that policy.
You have anything?
No, sir.
Okay, you have anything?
No, sir.
Any? Freeman?
Said my piece, sir.
Okay, all right. Back to you again now. Okay. We have a comment here. So I guess, you have anything else on the draft there?
Not on the draft.
Okay.
itself. What we can do at this point is we will review and include additional language. Chapter 2, and I'd also recommend Chapter 3 as well, because that's the special purpose districts. And those two chapters really outline what most people are going to be interested in from the public. How does this ordinance affect my property?
Oh, I absolutely, totally agree with that, and I think we need to have when we do get down to having the public, meetings for these things, is that we do need to have, a layout of those two chapters that tell, because those are gonna be the two big things that people wanna know about. What do you mean by an overlay district? I know we've heard that so many times that we sorta understand it, speaking for myself only, but there is, how does that impact a guy that lives on Mealing Road or somewhere, and the new developments that have already are under construction right now in various areas. So, the overlays are a unique aspect that they may not understand, but we did it in a sense to try to follow on with the comprehensive plan to have these corridors where we could have development. I think we can say Highway 25, and most people understand we'd like to see that as a more commercial, in a sense, area.
I have, and I hate to put you on the spot, Mr. Charles, but, with just give me your personal. On the spot. I'm gonna put you on that right in center. What is your opinion, since this would definitely be a chapter that you're gonna, sleep, live, and breathe?
Say that one more time.
I said, what is your personal opinion on this chapter 2? Because that's going to be a chapter that you're going to live, breathe, and sleep every day.
There's a lot of information in it. I think it's real good, but, we've tweaked it quite a bit. You're not gonna get it perfect, but, you're gonna have to drop back for some appeals and, variances and things, but, I think it's a good document. And you're not gonna get it perfect. The only thing I'll say, I said before, I know we're under a timeline supposedly that what we got, and we got way behind because of what's going on, but we better try to get it right the first time, because to change it and go back, it's gonna be very difficult. So, but I think everybody's done a good job. We just need to work as hard on as we can to finish it up.
And with your dealing with a jurisdiction that's much more stringent than we are here in Edgefield County, meaning North Augusta.
Mm-hmm.
Put this document up against North Augusta, what's your comparison?
Pretty much tit for tat. This is very detailed. Theirs is too. Every municipality is different,
Right.
But, I think the biggest differences in the two is the staff that's enforcing it and working with the public on it. That's the biggest part of it. You can do anything with a set of rules as long as you go by the rules. But, some places enforce them differently. And Edgefield County has always been very fair and done a good job in that. North Augusta just has a lot of moving parts. So, I mean, but I think they're both good.
She's saying that, 'cause like I say, the enforcement of it is the key to it. You know, who run the show. And not just that county, a lot of counties and cities that you deal with. I deal all over the state, that you got some individuals that in those departments, they just not public dealing folks. You know, hard to deal with. They make it tough when it don't have to be tough. You know, you need officials that go by the rules, but use some common sense and see the inside of the whole story. You haven't got that, you got a problem.
That's the problem they have.
Right, and that's the problem now.
It is. I mean, they're getting better, but I mean, they change people quite often, and you start a whole new chapter. So
10-year contract out of both y'all then, okay.
Anymore. I think we have our zoning map draft, right? We working on those tonight? Okay, we'll move into that then, I guess.
So, gentlemen, before I put the zoning map up on the screen behind me, this tool that we'll be looking at the map through, our plan, working with the GIS director, is to, after tonight, any recommendations that y'all, or changes y'all want to make, once we make those, we'll be able to put this tool online and let people submit comments, questions that I will receive that then can be passed on to the commission for consideration when possibly updating the map. We want to get as much public feedback on this, and I'll show you the tool and show you what, they'll be seeing the same thing we are, except there'll be a way to submit questions, comments, that sort of thing. Just to give you an example, if I click on a piece of property, it'll tell me it should give me the property information. Normally it would pop up, although we're having some internet issues down here. But if y'all want to go through the map and review it, I have physical copies that we can look at as well. It would not surprise me if some discussion of the zoning map has us go back to the draft language in the LMO discussing the different, zoning districts. But I'll let you take it from here.
Now, I know you said that it's gonna be up for people,
Mhm.
public comment and everything else. Once everything is final said and done, would that map always be available on the
So,
website?
it would be through the tax assessor. So, for example, this is the current county map.
Right.
So just in the same way that you can go and look at the current zoning, you'd be able to go and look at the new zoning.
By parcel.
Yes, you can look at individual parcels.
Gives
Like
you
that. Yep.
I understand this one. What was all those things with all the flags on it, little things up there? Was that the,
All the flags.
Ownership.
that's ownership, the green, the blue, what are,
That's the zoning.
oh, that's
No,
where?
that's the zoning.
That's our current zoning map.
That's your that's the way it is currently.
Yes. Correct.
Okay, all right, now I understand it. I just had not seen that map personally before. I've seen a lot of this other one that you had up there, the proposed one, the ones we've been looking at.
Everything that you see that doesn't have a color on it is unzoned property.
I think what you had to do is go to the left. You notice he clicked something down in the left?
Yep.
That's what he clicked, and that's what popped that up.
Kevin, where's Mount Vintage on there?
Mount Vintage is that space right there.
It is zone what?
Residential development, RD.
I didn't even look to see what it's, is that a, residential suburb now? Is that what that's called? What is it now?
It has several zonings in it. The larger lots are identified as residential estate, rural estate, and the other ones are identified as residential large lot. And then some of the green space within there is rural conservation, I believe.
Okay. No, I think that's exactly what people need to look at, and, you know, they're gonna need to have, not only are they looking at that map, at that, the other thing they need is that legend. What does all these different things mean? You know, so they're gonna have to be going back and forth a lot to look at those.
We're gonna prepare a preemptive document that comes when they go to the link to use the map.
Kevin, looking at that map of Mount Vintage, I see the thing in the front, the lime green color, the large lots.
That one right there is residential estate.
What's the color on everything else in there?
This, all around it,
No, inside of there,
Oh,
on the individual.
that's
lots.
the tan color for residential large lot.
Well, they all look white.
I mean, it's just the rendering on the screen. It's a tannish white color. It's,
But the lime green are residential estates, you said?
yes, those are rural estate.
Rural estate?
That is residential large lot, and the other green is rural conservation.
You're talking about the darker green?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I guess the golf course is basically is the conservation?
Correct. Essentially, what that would mean is, say for any reason that golf course ceased to operate and someone wanted to develop the land that was the golf course, they would be required to do so at a minimum lot size of 5 acres. The idea behind that typically is you do something that's a dedicated green space currently, you typically zone it your most, restrictive zoning in terms of residential, because the people who bought property, in those types of developments were doing so under the perception that what's going to be next to me, what is the, type of development here. Later in this document, we have conservation subdivisions. One of the big drivers behind the creation of conservation subdivisions as a planning practice was the closing down and redevelopment of golf courses.
Let me ask you a question, speaking about that in Mount Vintage. Let's just say, since the HOA owns that golf course now, and they get in trouble and lose that golf course and can't operate it. And the people within Mount Vintage that live there, which is the HOA, they want to develop part of that.
They would apply for a rezoning.
Right.
That's the thing about zoning that's important to remember. Nothing is permanent, right? Just like any part of this ordinance, county council can take an action through 3 readings and a public hearing to amend it.
As long as you can get it amended.
That's right. Well, and the general thought process is if it's appropriate to amend it, the county council will vote to do so.
We don't wish anybody in bad luck, but that could always happen.
Or they could develop it in 5-acre lots.
Which probably wouldn't be feasible.
Or they could leave it as a green area too, which is, why do most people buy around a golf course? The majority of people that buy around a golf course are not there to play golf. They're there because they like this open space, green land, ability to walk, and not having somebody sitting right on top of them. So, there's a few that play golf.
There's a cost to maintain all that, where it's that accessible for that.
There is, but green space, as maintained as green space, is easier to maintain than a golf course, I'll tell you. I could bush hog that.
Not to get into semantics, but golf as a game has been declining in playership. And one of the reasons that rural conservation has emerged as a type of development is people like that form of aesthetic, but with less demand for the commercial aspect of it. What you'll see is essentially fairways, pastures, green parks, pocket parks in developments that mirror the layout that you would typically see of a golf fairway.
Have they rezoned the North Augusta Country Club?
I have not followed it.
That's been annexed into the city of North Augusta now.
North Augusta now.
Yeah,
And
right.
It is zoned however they wanted it for a
Public
park.
use.
Okay.
Is there any specific properties or areas on the map that you would like to discuss, or anything that this relates to in the LMO draft?
Just run down to say, Sportsman's Corner area, in that area off of Martintown Road, and let's just kind of take a look, see at some of that down there, just to, really, that's about where it starts to get some more development.
So that blue color there is Sportsman's Corner itself.
That's the four corners, right?
Now, that lime green, tell me, lime green is what again?
Residential estate, excuse me, rural estate,
Rural estate.
light service commercial.
So that's really about the third drop down from rural agriculture, then you have rural conservation, and then you have rural estate.
Of the rural districts, rural estate is the one that's closest to higher density, minimum lot size of 2 acres. You do have a smaller size for minor subdivisions in rural agricultural, but for major subdivisions in rural agricultural, it's a larger lot size.
Yeah, but without flipping back over the lots I asked you about in Mount Vintage, the larger lots, they're rural estate as well, just like that.
Correct. So one of the things I did in developments that had specific patterns, so for example, that front portion of Mount Vintage, when it was developed, the average lot size is about 2 acres.
Right.
And in order to not, when I put together a draft map, not create nonconformities for a lot of people where their lots were smaller than the minimum of what their, say this new zoning district was adopted for them, in order to not create those nonconformities, I just put which zoning was most appropriate based on their current size. So Mount Vintage, for example, the reason you have residential large lot and rural estate is because part of the development was done as larger 2 acre sized lots, whereas other portions were done as an acre, some smaller than an acre, some about acre.
But it
Yeah.
started that way because there was no sewer and water out there.
Right.
It was correct that one of the considerations that you took looked at whenever you were looking at, say, along Spring Haven or some other road that's down where it's getting a little bit more dense, is you look to see what certain areas, the predominance of the zoning that was in there, to try to, I know you threw something on everything, and to
So-
try to keep continuity, or
Right.
if it was adjacent to a subdivision, you know,
So,
explain a
sure.
little bit.
So my process was, my chief guiding principle is the comprehensive plan land use map. And making sure that the zoning, because the land use map, its primary function is to let you know what type of zonings are appropriate within those land uses. So I tried to make sure that I maintained an appropriate density between the zonings when averaged out for what the comprehensive plan land use map recommends as the average zoning. So for example, much of this area in Meriwether in the comprehensive plan is identified as residential estate, right? So in order to maintain a balance of the average lot size as recommended in the residential estate, rural estate, I forget which it's called, you see a mix of residential large lot and rural estate, which creates a balance of the recommended zoning. The other thing that guided me was, what is the utility and the capability of many of these areas, right? Many of the areas that are identified as large lot and rural estate, they don't have sewer available, right? So it's not feasible for them to be developed at a suburban density. The other thing too is look at natural boundaries. I don't look at each individual property and go, what's the most, for one, that'd be spot zoning, and two, it'd be tedious. So I tried to find natural boundaries, roadways, waterways, things of that variety to create appropriate zones. And our land use map was done that same way, right? So it somewhat follows that pattern. I don't know if I have it on here. I might be able to pull both of them up and show them in comparison. I certainly have 2 physical copies of them that we can compare.
Oh, the land use map, right.
Also, as a note, one of the things he took into consideration is the current use of property as the ones that will have to track changes in creating non-conforming properties. We want to create as few non-conforming properties as possible.
There's a good example of that on Sweetwater Road. So those purple there are industrial. That is where your fuel tanks are. Right, they're not going anywhere anytime soon, and it would not be appropriate for us to zone them something that made them non-conforming. Our land use map also identified that as an industrial area because they're an established use, and the county's not trying to push them out, right? So no reason to zone them something that's gonna make them non-conforming.
What's that, is that lighter purple plum color behind it? What, is that owned by the pipeline companies?
I can look and see.
No, that's, I think that's Tim Campbell's property. Or Restmaster and all that stuff there.
No, that's not, no, you're not, that's down the other way.
Buckeye Terminals, LLC.
Okay, Buckeye owns that, okay. But there is a development, a residential development, just on the north side of that there, yeah, that's pretty heavy, I can't remember the name
That's
of
the
it.
Oaks.
Okay, right, that's pretty, that's been there for a number of years.
Since the seventies. Kevin, the backside of Mount Vintage, the 2,800 acres behind it. What is it zone?
Currently or on the draft map?
Who owns that?
Rural conservation.
No, no. No, he don't own quite that much anymore. That piece was part of Mount Vintage. There was 5,000 acres in one piece to start with.
Right.
And of course, John knows this, the sewer and the water line that feeds Mount Vintage comes across that property from Highway 25 out of Land O'Lakes. So at one point, all that was one piece. And the people that own it now, if Mount Vintage ever enlarged, and it has the sewer and water already on it, you don't think it ought to have a little designation?
So one thing I did was for large tracts of land that are of significant size that are below the town of Edgefield, I usually put them as rural conservation, particularly the ones that are over hundreds of acres. When you start talking about large-scale development, one of the things there that's usually appropriate to have occur is that to be done as a PUD or a custom residential development district as designed in our current ordinance, particularly at large scale, because you're talking about a dramatic change in the current use. So currently it's woods, it's undeveloped woods. And if someone came in and said, we want to put, 500 residential lots on it, you're talking about a major shift in the property. So it's usually appropriate for that to be either done as a rezoning or an application to, rezone it as a development that not only would be approved by the planning commission, but by county council. I didn't try to anticipate future development in terms of specific developments, rather making sure that we had allocation within the county for all sorts of developments, ones that would be using water and sewer and the areas that we know that we have those utilities and where it's appropriate to locate them, ones where you start to see, future possible service where we know service is expanding, but at a, larger lot size. And then areas in the county where it becomes rural and, septic tank would be the only way and will likely for many years be the only way to build residential properties out there.
But I think what Charles was getting at
My
here
point
is,
is the services are there now. It's not something that's serviced by wells and septic tanks.
well, it just makes it much more
So
marketable.
think,
for
and
it.
listen, this map can be changed by this committee however they see fit.
That's the reason I'm bringing that point up.
Right.
And,
I forgot
I don't
that.
have a dog in that fight, but I'm
Right.
just thinking about the
My
overall
thought
picture.
process was if there was a property that was over 150 acres that did have water and sewer available on it, and I zoned it, say, residential large lot, in theory, that could be broken into as many 1 acre lots as they could fit on it. So I'd be taking something that was currently 0 residential homes, 150 acres, and now they may be able to potentially stick 100 lots, 150 lots at the minimum lot size of 1 acre, right? And if I went even smaller, they could do more lots. With that scale of property, I think an application for rezoning or a CRD or PUD would be the appropriate method for them to go forward.
But just for development, common sense tells you if you got a sewer line running across 150, 200, 300 acres of land, it's much more
2,800.
2,800, 5,000, I don't care what it is. If you got a sewer line running right through it that you have access to and it's on your property,
Well, I'm
makes
just
it,
thinking about down the road,
more
one day,
marketable.
one day that's gonna expand.
yeah.
you know.
Well, and here's the other
Ultimately,
aspect to
the
it.
capacity of the sewer line is gonna limit whatever development goes in there.
That's
And
right.
it's only an 8-inch sewer line,
That's
so
true.
that's gonna
That's true.
ultimately
That
limit
would be
it.
a question for you.
Yeah, I'll be the bad guy at that point.
That's true.
The other aspect to that,
Limiting
and
factor.
the other aspect of that is, like I said, the comprehensive plan was my chief guiding thing. And if I, for example, owned a very large piece of property, residential large lot or residential suburban, I have to make up that density somewhere else within that land use area. And it becomes difficult to do that when there's areas that are more available and more appropriately available for smaller scale, higher density development, as opposed to, an area behind Mount Vintage, for example.
Basically what he's saying, if that area's average in the comp plan is 2.5 acres per lot, then we can't create a zoning district that's gonna make for that density to be much higher than 2.5 acres per lot. So he has to look at that whole area and make sure that it's in harmony with the requirements of the comp plan in that particular area.
And I will reiterate, this was, me taking my best crack at it to get an approximation. My hope would be that the committee would look at the map and have changes that they want to make to, recommend to the planning commission. And any recommendations that this body makes, we will make those updates. And when the planning commission looks at it at their next meeting, they will be looking at the recommendations of this body.
And it's also important to note that we expect, the planning commission can expect a lot of feedback from the public from that map. Once it's posted online, we hope that, most of the property owners are gonna comment, at least to some degree, even if it's just a thumbs up approval. We hope to get a lot of comments on the map once we put it online.
Kevin, I think y'all have done a good job on it.
Thank you.
I would too, but I would think when we were first having some of these meetings about the comprehensive plan, and we had various, let's get acquainted type, so to speak, meetings in a sense, is there anything like that in the plan as we go forward with the public?
Given that the zoning map is parcel specific, one of the reasons we want to do this online method is it allows someone to click on their property and see what their property is zoned, and then go, I was thinking about, splitting this 3 ways and, selling it to my nieces and nephews, right? And this would prevent me from doing that due to the acreage. And then they could comment, and that's something that could be considered. Or the more likely thing that we will see is people maybe wanting their property to be zoned at a density that's less than. So, for example, they have no intention of subdividing their property and selling it into, 6, or to 20, 12,000 square foot lots. But the zoning on their property allows them to do that. They may say, I would prefer to be, a residential large lot or a residential estate. The other thing to consider is, I don't know every individual property. I don't know where businesses may have occurred in the past or been existed. Martintown Road, for example, I know there's an intersection on there where people have suggested possibly putting some limited service commercial there. And I think it's an appropriate comment they had. And I believe there are other parts in the county where there's intersections that could use a different zoning than I identified. And I'd certainly want to get the public's feedback on that and for the commission to see it and consider that as part of their process.
One other item that you may also want to mention is that the overlays don't change zoning. They may change some of the requirements of the zoning, some of the densities, some of the setbacks, but they don't change the underlying zoning. So if there's specific areas or locations along Sweetwater or Martintown where a commercial or some other higher use is desired, we're hoping that we can find that at this stage over the next couple of meetings with the planning commission before it actually goes to county council.
I totally agree. I think that's a great idea.
So we had some internet difficulty down here and I wasn't able to pull it up, but the map will have the overlays on it, and we have just earlier this week completed the overlay map. Doc's gonna get a easel to put that up on.
Is it appropriate for us on the planning commission or the LMO steering committee to comment on what we think other pieces of property ought to be zoned?
Could you, was individual pieces or?
Individual pieces.
So spot zoning is illegal. So you have, now, that's not to say that zoning an individual property something is spot zoning. You know, the property may be 20 acres and it covers an entire intersection along two highways, right? It's appropriate to zone that property something. So what Doc has here in front of you is taking the language from the overlay section, which is in chapter 3, we mapped out what areas would be covered by those overlays. The one that's in magenta is Martintown. The one in yellow is Sweetwater Road. Orange down there is part of Sweetwater Road before it crosses the rail trail, as well as West Five Notch, Murrah Road Extension. And then the green is Highway 25, and the blue is Highway 25 from Trenton to Edgefield.
When you looked at, did you go along parcel lines, or did you just try to make it a certain?
No, sir. It is, so the language in chapter 3 specifically states a footage from the central line of the road, and the overlay follows that. So all of them are 500 feet from the center line of the road in either direction, and the Sweetwater Road is 1,000 feet.
Mr. Oliver, if I could go back to your question a minute ago, if you see something, or any of y'all see something on the proposed map that you think should be different than what is on the proposed map as far as the zoning category, yes, it would be certainly appropriate for you to mention that either at the LMO stage or at the planning commission stage.
Also, I'd like to say that even if you're not sure of the legalities of a comment or statement or something that you think you might want changed, you can still make that comment. We're not gonna let you break the law. I mean, you know, if you've got a recommendation, even if it's, you know, out in left field, you know, we will review everything that you send us, and if there's some kind of problem with it, of course, we're gonna let you know. We're not, we're not gonna try and pass anything that's, you know, gonna get anybody in trouble.
I talked about not knowing, you know, the history of every property. There could easily be a single property where there used to be a business on it that operated for 45 years, but hasn't in the last 15. And the property owners or, you know, grandchildren of the former property owners intend to open a business there. It's along a highway, not an inappropriate location for a business to be. And you as one of the committee members or the individual property owner might know that. And they can tell us that, and that can be considered, you know, as part of the zoning, you know.
I hadn't seen this map since y'all got that. I know when we first started talking about overlays, we were talking about 300, 400, 500 feet.
Mhm.
Now we're at 500 and 1,000. What's the thought process about 1,000 feet?
So the reason with 1,000 on Sweetwater Road is one of the primary things that was identified was vista preservation, right? You have a lot of long, distant views along Sweetwater Road that add to the aesthetic and the character of the corridor. So by having a larger overlay on it, it extends, you know, that aesthetic protection to that 1,000 feet mark. Now, one thing that's very important to recognize is that in the language for all the overlays is that if someone puts up an appropriate buffer, right, you know, essentially a hedge or something like that, that alleviates the requirements of the aesthetics for that overlay. So, for example, someone wants to put up a security fence because they have something on their property that they want protected, right? A chain link fence or a barbed wire fence, you know, or razor wire fence, right, may look out of place, you know, along a residential corridor on Sweetwater Road. But if they have a hedgerow that's covering that, or a, you know, 15-foot heavily vegetated, you know, natural buffer, right, where it essentially negates its visibility from the road corridor, that resolves that issue.
Well, I'd have to say, I think 1,000 feet is way overstepping on Sweetwater Road.
If the committee wants to reduce it, they certainly can. I mean, that language can be changed.
That doesn't make any sense to me. I understand what you're saying.
One of the things,
There's a lot of views on 25 Martintown Road as well, but to take 1,000 feet all the way down Sweetwater Road, you're gonna get some major pushback when that hits the street.
Is that 1,000 foot on each side or just
That's from
total?
the center line.
From the center line of the road in both directions, so it's 1,000 foot.
That's 2,000 feet, that's a lot of territory. Sure is. That's a lot.
How did we get to that?
One of the things we did is we measured what the distance was from the tree line to the road, using GIS to see what the average was. And for many of the properties, to get to the tree line from Sweetwater Road, it's about 1,000 feet, if not greater.
But, just because it's an overlay zone doesn't mean you couldn't develop there, Charles. I mean,
So you get, no, that ain't got anything to do with development, it's just the requirements, what anybody does in that.
Right, but now, just as a reminder, these overlays are not use overlays, they're aesthetic overlays.
That's correct. They do not, the underlining zoning is the only thing that controls use.
But the overlay controls the aesthetic of the buildings and that kind of thing.
Correct.
So they'd have to comply with the overlay, 1,000 feet back.
If you look in chapter 3, you will find the specifics which are laid out for each overlay district in terms of what they control. One of the primary things I would say, John, is things such as fences, building design. So, for example, de-emphasizing garage fronts, right? So if you're going to build a residence that faces the road, not having a garage that occupies more than 50% of the frontage of the building, things like that.
These people that have rural property, a big tract, and you start talking about aesthetics and fencing and things. Of course, I hadn't seen any details, but okay, you got a decorative fence on Sweetwater Road. For 1,000 feet back, you gotta have that, you can't have barbed wire.
Unless it had a protection in theory, yes. I mean, we'd have to look at chapter 3 to get to the specifics.
Just like those houses right before you get to Moore Road, between Moore Road and
I think what
Briggs
we have
Road.
been talking about there a lot is we always go back to Cooper Place along Sweetwater Road and the type of landscaping, that type of setbacks and things that are,
It's 50 feet.
yeah, I know that is, but that's the type of landscaping
Oh, I
that we
agree,
can
but,
get for subdivisions.
but to think that would extend down all of Sweetwater Road for 1,000 feet.
That'd be great.
I don't like that, now.
That'd be great, but it's not realistic.
That's not realistic, no.
I think what Mr. Blacks was talking about is not just so much development, but take
Also,
a
I'd-
farmer out there.
That's what
You
I'm
know,
talking
a cattle farmer don't wanna have to run aesthetic fence,
Right.
1,000 feet this way, 1,000 feet that way.
We just lost John Williams the last few weeks, and he has a nice fence in front of his house, but the rest of the fence is
Right,
barbed wire.
barbed wire going
Right, and I would like to point out that the Sweetwater overlay, the fencing was specifically chosen by what is currently on Sweetwater Road. So things like barbed wire, horse fence, wood fences, the black vinyl fences, all of those are allowed. So the things that are not allowed are gonna be, huge security fences, razor wire, that sort of stuff. But like your cattle fences, horse fences, all of that is currently allowed by the overlay. So
If you want to look at Sweetwater specifically, it is on chapter 3, page 56. Chapter 3, page 56.
Yeah, blank page.
Make sure you're in the right chapter.
Chapter 3?
Chapter 3, 56.
Yep.
Just a
Page
blank
56.
page.
Yep, page 56.
Well, there's verbiage there, it's just not a picture.
That's where it starts. It continues through the whole of the section.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
In chapter 3?
Yeah. So, as we've been saying, 2 and 3 are going to be, I think, really the ones that people want to,
Those people that go up and down, you tell them it's 1,000 feet.
people what?
People that go off the chart, you tell them it's 1,000 feet.
1,000 feet, that's a long way.
What is it on, Highway 25?
Currently?
It's 1,000 feet on it, isn't it?
Currently, it's 400 feet.
400?
Mhm.
Okay, what section is that?
Thank you.
Well, oh, you mean in this, it's 500 feet in this document, it's 400 feet currently,
What's the overlay that's currently in place on Sweetwater Road on the first
400 feet.
400 feet?
Now, what I will say though is the current overlays only apply to developments that are commercial and of a certain size. I believe it's, what, 40,000 square feet, Doc?
That's for the architectural controls, but the landscaping buffers and all that kind of stuff still apply for smaller commercial development. None of it applies to residential development.
And that's on our,
You said it doesn't apply to residential?
on our
development?
current overlay that is on Highway 25, Murray Extension and Sweetwater Road, it's 400 feet, you know, on either side, and it only applies to, you know, the architectural controls only apply to commercial that is 40,000 square feet or larger, and the landscaping only applies to commercial property.
So are we getting this out of the goodness of their heart from the people that are developing Tavern Hill to comply with what we had suggested?
Tavern Hill, that property had no zoning on it.
I know, so they agreed out of the goodness of their heart to make it look,
No, we
The-
didn't do
the
that.
current-
We
the
just
cur-
thought we did it 'cause that's the way it needs to be done.
there you go, all right.
And
Well,
the current-
that's what I like.
And the current overlay does not extend to that portion of Sweetwater Road.
Okay, right, we
There
don't
was
really-
any zoning at that time, it didn't matter.
right.
I just, the 1,000 feet, I think is gonna be. a
1,000
big
feet
issue.
is, I agree with you on that, that's a lot, long ways out there.
And if it was on Martintown Road, I'd say the same thing.
And when it comes to development, remember they're putting their name on it and selling it.
Exactly.
But remember also that after it's sold, an individual person owns that property that's within 1,000 feet. And so at some point in time, you may be dealing with an individual and not a developer, unless there's something in here that I've missed.
I will say one of the things I did leave out, that topography also negates the overlay. So for example, if something is behind a hill, right, the overlay doesn't extend, you know, on beyond it. So if you have a berm essentially or a hill that's blocking the view of it, that's the same as a vegetative buffer.
Tommy, what you're talking about is a good point, but like what we're doing, I mean, it's all gonna be covered under covenants, so they're gonna be held to the letter of the law with covenants.
Right,
So-
but I think back about, you know, if we're talking about this and only looking at developers,
Right, you gotta look at all of it.
no, at some point in time, you know, you may get an individual homeowner that's bought in a development that's covered by this, that comes in and wants to do something, and then he has to comply with this. So, it's not always gonna be a developer.
Yeah, and it's important to note that the larger developments like that are their PUDs and PRDs. They have custom zoning districts applied to them as well. So, what Tommy's talking about is more like the average individual who buys a lot that's not covered by covenants, deed restrictions, custom zoning districts, et cetera.
The pushback's not gonna be from developers over that.
Well, you know, maybe maybe it may not be as much from the individual landowners. I don't know, you've dealt more with them than
If I were-
have. But if there's, as you were saying, you know, this is hardly, there's nothing that's gonna really hold them hard and fast to that, in a sense. I mean, it's aesthetics.
If I were to guess, the biggest pushback you would get from the public is, you're telling me I can't put a chain link fence on my property.
Well, design of buildings falls under that as well, right?
Correct. So for example, if,
That's what I'm talking about.
so for example, if they wanted a house and they wanted a forward-facing garage that took up more than 70% or 50% or whatever the number is of the front facade of the building, that would not be approved. So they would have, exactly, so you get something like that. Correct.
Isn't that true in a lot of subdivision areas and stuff now? Not that per se, but they don't wanna have any garages facing the
Well,
streets.
just give you Mount Venus, for example, it's got everything. It's got front loading, side loading, rear loading. But you got different size lots, different orientation, but that's all covered within the covenants. But what he's saying, he's got a point, but I mean, if you have it where you can't have a front loaded garage within 1,000 feet of road, that's the pushback from homeowners I'm talking about you're gonna get.
Yeah, that's a disadvantage there,
A
right?
single homeowner that owns 50 acres that wants to build his house
Right.
800 feet off the road.
And his optimal site is right there overlooking a pond, and it's within that district. You can't build your house on your property because it's within that 1,000 feet the way you want it. That's the pushback I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Well,
if
he
you
can,
want
as long
to,
as he meets the requirements or he's not in sight.
Say it again?
I mean, as long as he's not in sight of the road, he can. And if he is in sight of the road, he just has to de-emphasize his garage or rear load it.
if you want to look at the specifics, page 60, 3710-9, building design and materials, that's the language. And that starts at the top of that page and halfway down for architectural controls.
Oh, yeah.
Doc, where does it, do you know exactly where it says if he's not in sight of the road? Does it actually call that out in here?
I believe that's towards the beginning, and it does. And it's not, I don't think the language is inside of the road. It either says, you know, a topography or, you know, a vegetative buffer or something of that nature.
But to give you an example, Kevin, in Cooper Place, they referring to Cooper Place, the first house in Cooper Place, which is 60 feet from the road, has a front-loading garage that's visible from the street. So, I mean, that's the kind of pushback that we're gonna get about that, so. I understand what you're saying, but I think that's very restrictive on that far back.
Cause Charles, those houses right there before you get to,
That's too strict.
Moore Road on the left right there.
Yeah.
Correct.
On Moore, Sweetwater Road there. Moore Road.
Yeah.
Those houses, they're within that 1,000-foot setback, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, I'd say they are within, they're on what, 5-acre lots and stuff
You're
there?
talking about what Jim Miller developed?
Yeah, yeah.
They're not 1,000 feet.
No, right, they're less than that.
They're a long way down.
So, yeah.
They're only 3 acres.
Yeah.
3 acres? Okay. That just give me some type of,
And, you know, I'd have to think through that. I go by them every day, but I would think, I don't know that any of them have garages towards the road, but.
But you always got that possibility. though.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
Well, the way some of those lots lay.
Right.
It may not be forced, I think I know one that's to the side, if it's the house is facing the road.
No, it
this
definitely is something, one from the
Right.
front, but.
Anyway, well, I think these are things that we could work through, you know, I mean,
Also, it's important to note that this is about what you want to see on Sweetwater Road.
well, the reason people want to be out on Sweetwater Road, it's a beautiful drive, it's really nice out there, it's aesthetically pleasing, and it's a little windy road, but
Right, and now, fast forward 30 years from now, you've broke it down to 1-acre lots all the way down it, and they're front-facing garages 250 feet off of the center line of the road, and it's turned into a suburb. That's what you're
Referencing
trying to
larger
avoid.
tract owners right now, is what I'm talking about. I understand what you're saying.
I would hope
The,
that
the
there's
way,
a-
the way this is written is kind of like how we envision the future of Sweetwater Road and how are we going to achieve it. And that's the important part of that document.
Well, I totally agree, and I would also think that, as I've said here in the planning commission meetings in the past with that development on Currytown and,
Mealing?
Mealing Road, excuse me for not remembering that, but, there's gonna be areas like that that are gonna have different road construction in a sense in areas as they get developed, you know, and I'd love to see a roundabout, that be the first roundabout in Edgefield County. Because we're gonna have some of that. I don't know about Sweetwater Road, about widening it, but I think, wasn't that part of the discussion that it would just, I mean, keep it the way it is in a sense? As Doc said, you know, 20, 30 years from now, what will it look like? I hope it looks nice.
I believe it was discussed in the,
You and I probably won't.
I believe it was discussed in the comprehensive plan that Sweetwater Road was identified as a road corridor that had many characteristics and aesthetic qualities that the county wanted to encourage. Secondary to that, I know through discussion that the hope is that long-term, it has the potential to potentially be something like a scenic drive, the Sweetwater, road corridor being, something that people drive down specifically to look at. If you've been to cities like Charlottesville, where they have the wine country and they have the Virginia Scenic Drives, which are established and codified overlays, that was something that they started in a process, 30 years ago, and then have continued. And, they had to take small steps then to move in that direction. If that's something that we want to hold to in the comprehensive plan, those are just aspects to consider for an overlay district.
I don't disagree with you at all about that.
Well, I do know several years ago when I was on the P and Z, I was one of the ones that brought that up in reference to Sweetwater Road. I don't remember the direct distance. I don't think it was 1,000 feet. I think it was 500 feet. But my concern was the situation of where, Mount Vintage had done a very, very nice development, all privatized, no governmental entity whatsoever. And so my goal was to protect that corridor leading up to Mount Vintage. And I think that was one of the first, time frames when we came up with the overlay section of that.
And to that point, I think it was great, the layout and the concept, but things have changed a little bit since then. And what you're proposing, we need some of that because look what happened to Mount Vintage. They don't own the first piece of property on Sweetwater Road. They have no control over it.
Right.
Every Tom, Dick, and Harry and Augusta and everywhere else bought it at tax sales. So Mount Vintage don't own the first inch where that black fence is. So that's something to be concerned about. And overlay will definitely help that. My point was just the distance, that's all.
Well, and if the, committee wants to change anything, they can make that recommendation to the planning commission. I would suggest that any specific changes you want to make, confirm that you have a majority on that to the planning commission, and then we will reflect that in the update for what the planning commission reviews in August.
Kevin, I'm looking at on page 3-15.
Okay.
And I see the 500 feet. But where does it say 1,000 feet for Sweetwater?
Well, it says it on page 58.
Does it? Okay, that's what I've been looking for.
On
I
page
think
56.
John can explain this.
The standard for the CDP zoning is a 500 foot from the edge of the table.
It's on page 56.
There it is, I got it.
Only on Sweetwater, and that segment of Sweetwater is where it says 1,000 feet.
Yeah, and right, it's not
I'm
the
with you.
entire length all the way to.
No, it is the entire length except the very first part. That green is all the way to Edgefield.
Okay.
Yeah, that goes all the way, see, when you get up to the,
When you get past. the
close to
gas tank,
Edgefield,
that
when you
past
get
the
up
gas
and
tank,
past,
1,000 feet.
along in there around,
That's what
Jeter
my
Road
intention-
and all in Atlanta Road and White, all in that, it would be, that's just too far. 'Cause that, see, the overlay of that land, if you took that land and cleared it off right now, you'd be surprised how it look. You see, it's got a lot.
I see both sides
I
of
know
it,
it.
but I just think the
But that's too
private
much.
homeowners are gonna
I
have an
think,
issue with that.
I wouldn't want.
I guess my gut feeling, in a sense, just sitting here thinking, is that I commend Kevin and you guys for doing that and proposing it. I think it's get the citizens to thinking about some of these things. What do we want to preserve? What do we want to do,
Kevin, you call my wife, she wanted 5,000 feet.
We'll get her to send in comments.
Well, is that something, in all seriousness, that the LMO committee would want to change going forward? If you want to, it's y'all's document. It's not the planning department's or staff's, it's y'all's document. So if y'all want to change something before it goes to the planning commission, now's the time.
Well, I think the thing that was interesting, and I didn't know this, is that Kevin said they use GIS to calculate the average distance back to the tree lines or stuff along the road.
So what we did was we looked at tree lines, topography, right? So the crest of hills, as well as where the frontage of residence began. Obviously, it's a long road. Once you get past Mount Vintage, you're essentially talking about woods. That's one thing also to remember. On a piece of wooded property, if someone develops with a 15-foot vegetative buffer, on the edge of the property, they're not subject to the overlay. because they've met the buffer requirement. You know, as far as the parts where, and one of the reasons we went with 1,000 feet was a lot of the vistas and the scenic overlooks along Sweetwater Road that you see, they're not within 500 feet of the center line of the road, right? They extend well beyond that. And if you don't have the overlay and the aesthetics within that portion, the only control that you would have is what the zoning is. But
What do you think the percentage of that extend past 500 feet are?
the percentage of the vistas that extend beyond,
I'm talking about cleared pasture land, is basically what we're talking about.
I wouldn't have a good guess.
And that's the difference in Sweetwater Road and Bartontown Road, because Bartontown Road has a lot of the same type people that live there. They just, there's more farming areas on Sweetwater Road and older big tracts of land that have been held for so many years and there's pasture land.
Yep, Martintown Road is far more wooded.
And it cleared it all, so.
And it's got, you know, Stevens Creek too.
Yeah, it does, but, you know, they both need to be protected, but,
They're different.
I will say this, one of the things that was considered is that Sweetwater Road is far more appealing to be developed and far more easier to develop than Martintown Road.
don't have any sort of.
There's pressure on Sweetwater Road. There's not much pressure on Martintown Road.
Is there natural gas running out Sweetwater Road?
Oh, yeah.
I believe so.
Sewer.
It's about finished, as far as it goes.
Now, I bet there's no sewer.
Sewer comes,
But it
Cross-
doesn't.
cross country.
Right, it doesn't come up Sweetwater
no,
Road.
Correct.
and if it did, there would be a lot more development, we know that. When they ran the water line up Sweetwater Road, that's when we bought the Shaw Estates property, because we knew what was gonna happen.
Personally, myself, I'm happy with staying with 1,000 and see what happens in a sense there. You know, we could, at least we have a rationale that can be explained on what was selected.
And I don't have a strong opinion in terms of, and I don't want to dissuade you from wanting to change it. You know, I just want to make sure I explain why it was selected for 1,000 feet and not 500 as it is with the other ones. One thing that could consider if you're unsure of wanting to make a change to it now is the way we will be getting public comment. And part of the map is I want to include the overlay districts on that zoning map so that when the public look at it, they'll be able to see the overlays as well as the zonings.
Are you gonna be delineating them with the same color, kind of color scheme?
I had our GIS director test it to see how that the color for each overlay looked with the zoning on underneath so that it was visible. We found that having different colors for the different overlays did not look good, and also, I mean, not to get into semantics, but we found that there was a teal color that was quite clearly visible on all the other zoning colors and it doesn't change the underlining color of the zonings to make it look like a different zoning. You know, we'll continue to work on that before we put the map out there, make sure it's something that's clear and concise. We certainly want it to be something that's more explanatory than creating confusion.
Well, what's your decision, are we gonna? Overlay. You know, last time, my opinion, 1,000 feet is just too much to me. I don't know about that. What's your opinion on it?
I agree, I think 1,000 feet's too much, but I think maybe we wait on public comment.
Yeah,
We can do that then, right?
Can we wait till then before we make a change?
So once we have all the recommendations from this committee, I'll be working this week with the GIS director to get that map out with any changes that are proposed here. And also getting the language changed so that when it goes to the planning commission on August 13th, they'll be seeing whatever changes this board proposes. Also during that period, people will be able to submit public comments. And at that meeting will be a public hearing for the public to come and speak to the commission and state, I believe August 13th, correct?
Okay, that's when the planning commission meeting.
Yes, that's the planning commission meeting.
Quick.
Do we need to voice our opposition now or wait for the public
That's
comment?
what I was.
Could we suggest to the planning commission, or when this document goes to the planning commission, could we make a recommendation that, the planning commission, listen strongly to the public comments made regarding
Absolutely.
the overlay districts?
We could make it a specific agenda item.
There's one additional item that could be considered, using the source material that we use for pulling this together, which is, green CC, which is preserving scenic views along byways. Another possibility is we could go with a 500-foot, corridor with an additional 500-foot scenic setback.
Explain that.
Yeah, that's,
Well, what they recommend in here is that they have certain rules within the first 500 feet, and then from 500 feet throughout the vista, the view shed, they call it, which is scenic, then they have some additional requirements which may only affect certain parts of the ordinance. So that's a possibility if you're interested in looking at it that way too.
Well, I'd have to know what the specifics were.
to me, almost, that sounds a little bit more restrictive
It's
than,
only a trick question.
you know, what if you put a cell phone tower?
What it means is it doesn't change your front facades, the setbacks, whatever. It may give you some additional opportunities to create vistas, scenic, and maintain scenic vistas without requiring all the specifics in terms of building design, fencing.
How do you keep those vistas but not making them comply?
Well, if you're talking about the type of fencing,
Right.
for example,
Right.
you know, the fencing that's more than 500 feet away may not be as visibly offensive to someone.
Couldn't see it.
I can't see that far.
Well, I certainly can.
Well, I just think, I'm not just talking about fences, I'm just talking about overall.
Me too, I guess.
We'll look into this
Yeah,
to
that's
support
whatever.
the staff.
When I discussed that with John, my understanding essentially was rules X, Y, and Z apply for the first 500 feet. Rule X applies for the next 500 feet.
And we got the definition of the X, Y, Z, and X.
Correct.
Right.
Although you could discuss that now, and if there were restrictions that you felt like, that you like within the first 500 feet, but say wanted to loosen for the next 500 feet,
I
if you
really
wanted.
think you aren't waiting for public comment, like you said, because that's where you're gonna get most of your information.
I would say, Mr. Blackston asked if y'all could change it, or if the planning commission could change it. Y'all can change it, anything in here tonight.
That's what I'm
Once
thinking.
you send it to the planning commission can change anything until they send it to council. And then council can change anything up until the, third reading or an approval of the ordinance.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
With that said, can we make a motion to propose a change it from 1,000 feet on Sweetwater Road to 500 feet?
And that, you know, to me, that's a,
Just go ahead and get it done now.
can I get a second on that motion?
I second that motion.
Okay, motion is second that we, change the, overlay from 1,000 feet to 500 feet on the Sweetwater corridor. All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, opposed? Okay, so that'd be good. We go with that and then any further.
And one of my big reasons for saying that is due to the fact of, now it will put it in correlation with all the other overlays of 500 feet, 500 feet.
Think it could. Okay. All right, now, tonight, we need to vote on sending this draft, cause this LMO, this is the last, committee meeting for this, as a LMO. So we need to, vote to send it to the planning commission for August. So any final discussion or anything else before we, put that motion up? Our mind is about complete, satisfied.
We're
with it.
talking about, whether to forward the LMO draft to the planning
To the
commission.
planning commission, right, we need that vote tonight, cause it's.
If I may, Chairman, if you want this document to be different in any way from it is currently, you've already taken care of that one item.
Right.
But if you want it to be
Right.
different in the other way, you need to establish that now and then, you know, pass it on to the planning commission for further review and public hearing.
Were the comments that, suggestions I made earlier and you and I talked about in that adding in that clarification part at the front, would those things be done before we would?
If you would like to make a motion on that and then get the consensus of the committee.
I might also mention that you're on the planning commission, Mr. Oliver. So your comments, if you would rather wait until it's written and you can review it, you will have the opportunity to do so.
We could certainly put together a draft of it and have you take a look at it and see if it was in keeping.
I forgot how many hats I do wear, so that's okay. It's fine.
Chairman,
Entertain a motion?
I entertain a motion that, the draft that we have currently here in front of us, we move forward and promote it, position it on to the planning commission as written with those exceptions that we just talked about tonight.
Second. Motion and second, all in favor of the said motion, raise your right hand. Okay, all in, announcing it would go from here to the planning commission for further discussion of the draft. Okay.
Look at the smile on his face, he was like, all right.
At this time of the year, we were supposed to have had this, totally completed, weren't we?
There's a lot of things we were supposed to have.
Supposed to have a thing
Thank you,
changing.
Charles.
The,
A few
Like
things.
an unsafe.
Pandemic.
yes, the goal right now is to have this go before the planning commission in August and September so that they can have 2 public hearings. That way they have time to respond to information they get at the first public hearing. And then you have a following 3 months for county council.
Gentlemen, appreciate those.
Mr. Chairman, I know we have 3 members here in the public here. Did they have a chance to say anything? Or?
During public hearing, I mean, it's always the discretion of the chairman to how he wants to conduct the meeting.
Well, I have no problem with make it short. Anybody have any comment? Okay.
You see that guy down in the pink, if you.
Ms. Paradise, you have any?
Excuse me?
You have any comment on that? Okay.
I appreciate all of you guys' efforts because this has been a major undertaking. I appreciate the fact that you have involved the citizens. I appreciate the fact that y'all have live squints stream what you can. Because I think the more that the citizens can go and look and see what y'all's process is, I think that helps a lot. Because as you said, this is a lot to absorb. Of course, I've been in every one of these, so, you know, I know where the process has brought us. And I think it being where the citizens can go and look and say, okay, this is what they're thinking. Well, that makes sense. That's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, we did just move here from Savannah, and we purchased land here and a house here. And we're very impressed with Kevin and what he was able to show us. And we were, what he is explaining to you all, we were the public that showed his office and asked questions. Very impressed with your growth. And growth is coming. We want to be a part of that. We live here. We love it here, and it's beautiful here. We moved here from the island area of Savannah. And now we're in the country, and it's gorgeous, and the people are wonderful, and we want to be here for a long time to come. So,
Well,
thanks for letting us be here.
welcome. Thank you.
That's why all of us live here, why we all move here, why we want to have controlled growth in this particular part of the county. We know it's coming, so we're trying to get almost 1 foot ahead of the curve, but I don't know if we'll make it, but thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, no further. We adjourn.
Motion.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor of adjourn, we adjourn. Appreciate your time. Appreciate the work everybody done with us. Been a pleasure.